Welcome to a world where your sincerity is a currency that will inevitably be stolen from you. If you believe that trust is the foundation of a relationship, you have already lost. In the social ecosystem, there are no friends or partners in the romantic sense that mass culture has imposed upon you. There are only temporary alliances and biological units competing for dominance, resources, and the right to dictate their will. You are either a predator who controls information flows or a resource that these flows deplete. Your openness is not a virtue. It is a breach in your armor through which social parasites inject the poison of manipulation. I am not here to comfort you. I am here to dissect your mistakes and teach you how to turn your life into an impregnable fortress. We begin the cycle of deconstruction. 7 things that must remain in the shadows of your mind if you do not want to become prey. If you recognize yourself or your past reactions in the described patterns or character behaviors, put a plus in the comments. This is not a sign of weakness, but the first signal that your brain has begun the process of deconstructing old habits. Chapter 1. The effect of imaginary safety. Never reveal your true goals. The encounter phase. A penthouse in the center of London. The air smells of expensive tobacco and ozone from the air conditioners. Mark sits in a leather chair across from Arthur, a man whose capital allows him to buy politicians for breakfast. Arthur slightly tilts his head. His eyes are 2 cold lenses recording every micro-movement made by Mark. So, Mark, Arthur's voice sounds soft, like silk concealing a noose. You want to launch this project. But what is your real goal? Do you want money, or do you want to enter history by changing the rules of the game in logistics? Mark feels a wave of vanity rising within him. He wants to confess. He wants to say, I want to destroy the monopoly of Corporation X and become the new king of the market. Mark's internal monologue. He is looking at me with such respect. If I open up, he will see my scale. We will become allies. My pulse has quickened, 95 beats per minute. I must hide my excitement, but the desire for recognition itches like an open wound. I simply want to create a high-quality product, Arthur, Mark says, but his pupils treacherously dilate for a fraction of a second. Arthur smiles. He has already understood everything. Of course, he says, thinking, you want dominance. Now I know your lever. I will offer you the illusion of power, and you will give me the keys to your company for a pittance yourself. 2. The psychological X-ray phase. What happened? Mark committed a classic mistake. He allowed his opponent to probe the vector of his movement. Cognitive suppression. When you voice your ambitious goals, the brain receives cheap dopamine. You have done nothing yet. But social approval, or even just the realization of your own greatness in the eyes of another, creates an illusion of completion. Your motivation drops. Information vulnerability. Knowing your goal, an adversary can build a false corridor. They will throw resources at you that seem like steps toward the goal, but in reality, they lead you toward their interests. Neurochemistry. At the moment of confession, Mark's oxytocin levels, the hormone of trust, spiked. This is a biological trap. Oxytocin reduces critical thinking, making the subject suggestible. 3. The psychological precedent. Phase. In 2009, psychologist Peter Gollwitzer conducted a series of experiments, the results of which should become your handbook for survival. He proved that people who openly state their intentions related to their identity, for example, I will become a great architect, are much less likely to see the matter through to the end. When subjects announce their goals, their brains perceive this as an already achieved status. In a social experiment, the silent group worked on a task for an average of 40% longer and more effectively than the group of talkers who quickly lost their drive, having already received their portion of social stroking for good intentions. Arthur knows this intuitively. He made Mark feel like a winner ahead of time, so that Mark would lose his vigilance. 4. The counter-strike phase. If Mark were a strategist, he would have used the information vacuum technique. Lesson number 1. Your goal is your operating system. No one should see the source code. How he should have acted. Sterile answer. The response must be sterile and devoid of emotional charge. False vulnerability. Say that your goal is to pay off a mortgage or achieve modest indicators. This will lull the predator's vigilance. He will consider you small prey and will not waste resources on a complex attack. Keep the quote, _19, ___. Inside. Silence is the space where strength grows. 5. Sensory immersion. Outside the penthouse window, London turns into a grid of lights resembling a microcircuit. The cold light of the moon reflects off a glass of whiskey. The ice melts, emitting a barely audible crack. This is how the empires of those who talk too much crumble. In this room, there is no warmth, only the calculation of trajectories. The silence presses on the ears, forcing the weak to fill it with words. But a true leader knows. In this silence lies his power. Your need for sympathy is an invitation to your execution. In the world of social predators, quote 20 about past wounds is perceived not as trust, but as an instruction manual for your dismantling. If you show a scar, you show the place where one must strike. Chapter 2. Anatomy of vulnerability. Never reveal your past, defeats, and psychological traumas. The quote, _21, phase A, rainy evening in New York. A restaurant with dimmed lights, where the clink of silverware sounds like the cocking of hammers. Julian sits across from Clara. She is a master of quote 22, a woman who turns others' secrets into levers of pressure. Clara lightly touches Julian's wrist, her voice full of fake warmth. You know, Julian, I heard about your previous project in San Francisco. It must have been terrible to lose everything because of a partner's betrayal. I went through that too. Tell me, how did you cope? What did you feel at the moment you realized you had been cheated? Julian feels a familiar bonfire of old resentment flare up in his chest. His throat tightens. He wants to speak out, to find a kindred spirit in her. Julian's internal monologue. She understands me. Finally, someone who does not judge. My cortisol is skyrocketing. I feel cold in my fingers. This is the fight or flight reaction. But my brain mistakenly interprets this as the excitement of intimacy. If I tell her about my pain, she will understand how strong I am for having survived. But why are her eyes following my lips so closely and not my emotions? She is waiting for names. She needs the details of my disgrace. It was... Julian pauses, his voice cracking. It was total destruction. I did not sleep for 3 months. I still flinch when I hear that man's name. Clara nods sympathetically. Poor Julian, she whispers, thinking, recorded, trigger, betrayal, weak point, excessive emotional fixation on the past. Now I know that if I begin to imitate loyalty, you will become my slave out of fear of the pain repeating. Your scar is a button for controlling your behavior. 2. The psychological X-ray phase. Julian has just committed social suicide. He has handed over the map of minefields of his mind. Trauma bonding. Clara provoked Julian into self-disclosure by imitating a similar experience. This creates a false sense of security. Signaling theory. In biology, An individual demonstrating an injury becomes a target for attack. By telling of a defeat, you transmit, "I have a flaw in my strategy. I allowed myself to be deceived." For a predator, this is a signal. Your defense mechanisms have breaches. Neurochemistry. During memories of trauma, the amygdala is activated. The rational prefrontal cortex shuts down. Julian, at this moment, is not a strategist. He is a frightened animal seeking shelter. 3. The psychological precedent phase. Let us turn to Irving Goffman's concept of stigma and impression management. Goffman proved that any information about a past failure, social, financial, or personal, automatically spoils the identity of the subject in the eyes of others. In one experiment, it was shown that people subconsciously attribute fewer cognitive abilities to losers, even if their failure was a matter of chance. As soon as you acknowledge the status of a victim in the past, society begins to treat you as a potential victim in the future. You move from the alpha category to the defective category. Your past defeat becomes your biological marker of inferiority in the current hierarchy. 4. The counter-strike phase. If Julian possessed the art of psychological defense, he would have used the golden mask. Lesson number 2. Your past is scorched earth. Never return there in the presence of witnesses. How he should have acted. Radical pragmatism. When Clara touched upon the topic of pain, Julian should have moved the conversation to the plane of numbers and lessons devoid of emotions. False amnesia. The project in San Francisco? That was an interesting case regarding the redistribution of assets. I extracted the necessary data from it and closed the folder. Emotions. In business, they cost too much to experience. Mirror attack. Instead of an answer, a question. And what made you remember that exactly now, Clara? Are you looking for analogies for your current problems? 5. Sensory immersion. Outside the restaurant window, raindrops shatter against the glass, resembling the tears that Julian should not have shown. In the air hangs the heavy scent of Clara's perfume, a mixture of amber and something metallic, similar to the smell of blood. The silence between them is no longer cozy. It is sticky. Clara slowly sips her wine, her reflection in the glass distorted, turning her face into the mask of a satisfied reptile. Julian feels the cold of the tabletop. Hard, unwavering stone. That is exactly how his voice should have been. But now his weakness is already recorded in her memory, like a code that will sooner or later breach his future. You think that your virtue is your shield. You believe that by demonstrating your generosity and moral superiority, you are buying the loyalty and respect of those around you. Fool. In a world of high social competition, your good deeds are merely markers of your boundaries. You show everyone where your will ends and your need for approval begins. Chapter 3. The Trap of Altruism. Never reveal your good deeds and charitable acts. 1. The encounter phase. An office in a glass skyscraper in the city of London. Oliver, a successful fund manager, sits at a desk made of polished obsidian. Opposite him is Marcus, a man whose reputation is built on swallowing companies and eliminating competitors without a single shot. Oliver feels a surge of pride. He has just anonymously, as he thinks, transferred £2 million to save a children's hospice, and could not resist mentioning it in conversation, veiling it as a quote 45, quote 46. Oliver slightly loosens his tie, his voice sounding with a slight hint of self-satisfaction. Marcus freezes. His fingers, long and dry, stop moving over the prayer beads made of black agate. He looks at Oliver as if Oliver had just voluntarily put on a collar. Oliver's internal monologue, quote 48. Quote 49, Marcus repeats the words slowly, tasting them like cheap wine. Thinking, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 50, underscore, underscore. 2. The underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 51, underscore, underscore phase. Oliver has performed an act of strategic disarmament. In social psychology, this is called underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 52, underscore, underscore. But in this context, he has become a victim of his own vanity. Projection of vulnerability. By demonstrating underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 53, underscore, 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 you show your opponent your value anchors. Now Marcus knows that Oliver can be blackmailed with questions of ethics or by imitating a need to coax concessions from him. Hierarchical aggression. Altruism is a hidden claim to dominance. When you help another, you subconsciously place them in a dependent position. However, in underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 54, underscore, underscore relationships, public virtue causes not gratitude, but hidden aggression and envy, do-gooder derogation. Neurochemistry. Oliver is in a state of the quote 55, the release of oxytocin and endorphins from the realization of his quote underscore 56 lowers his vigilance. He perceives Marcus as an ally, although Marcus at this moment is calibrating Oliver's quote underscore 57 of responsibility. 3. The quote underscore 58 quote phase. In 2010, researchers from Washington State University conducted a series of experiments that overturned the idea of quote underscore 59 quote in a public goods game. Participants who made excessively large contributions, demonstrated excessive altruism, were expelled by the group. Why? Because their behavior set the bar too high for the others. The underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 60, underscore, underscore types made others feel inferior and created suspicion regarding hidden motives. In Marcus's eyes, Oliver is either a manipulator who wants to appear better than he is, or a weak idealist. In both cases, he is a target for attack. Here, a biological law takes effect. Status challenge. A public good deed is an attempt to take the moral high ground, and a predator will always try to throw you off that summit. 4. The counter-strike phase. If Oliver were a master of power, he would hide his charity like a state secret. Lesson number 3. Your conscience is your personal compass. If an enemy learns about it, he will hold a magnet to it, how he should have acted. Radical pragmatism. To the question of responsibility, answer in categories of efficiency. My investments go where they give the maximum return to the system. Ethics here is a byproduct of mathematics. Information asymmetry. Let people guess about your motives. If they consider you cold and calculating, their terror of you will be your best defense. When a cold person suddenly shows mercy, it is a strategic shock. When a kind person does the same, it is an expected routine. False immorality. Sometimes it is useful to appear slightly more cynical than you are. This forces the enemy to overestimate your cruelty and make mistakes out of fear. 5. Sensory immersion. In Oliver's office, it smells of ozone and sterility. The light from the lamps reflects in his eyes, but Marcus sees in them not light, but voids that can be filled with his own interests. Tick-tock. The expensive watch on Oliver's wrist counts down the time of his leadership, which is rapidly expiring. The air between them becomes dense, like cold gel. Marcus smiles slightly, and in that smile is the cold of surgical steel. Oliver feels a strange draft, although the windows are closed. This is his power departing, displaced by his own need to be good. Your plans are your only head start in time. When you voice your tomorrow, you deprive it of strength. You turn the potential energy of action into cheap noise. You invite competitors, envious people, and mere idle observers into the holy of holies of your strategy, into the moment of its birth. Remember, an invisible strike is the most crushing. Chapter 4. The Fog of War. Never reveal your plans for the future one. The Encounter Phase. A gallery of modern art in London's Mayfair. The walls are dazzlingly white, like an operating room. Ethan, an ambitious architect, stands by an abstract canvas with a glass of champagne. Nearby is Sarah, a socialite and gray eminence in the world of real estate. Her smile is flawless, but behind it hides a calculator computing the cost of every word. Your recent works? They are strokes of genius, Ethan. Sarah lightly touches his shoulder, creating an illusion of intimacy. But I feel that you are preparing something even greater. Where do you plan to build your next masterpiece? Singapore? Dubai? Ethan feels enthusiasm boiling within him. He needs confirmation of his status. He wants Sarah to know he is on the threshold of the greatest deal of his life. Ethan's internal monologue. She has access to all the boards of directors. If I tell her about the tender in Tokyo, she might put in a good word. My brain is already drawing newspaper headlines. Pulse 110. I feel this sweet taste of victory right now, although the contract has not been signed yet. I need this recognition, this dopaminergic surge, to convince myself that I am not risking everything in vain. It will be Tokyo, Sarah. A revolutionary project for modular housing. We are signing the papers in a week. I will overturn this market. Ethan says this with barely concealed triumph. Sarah takes a sip of mineral water. Tokyo. She draws out, thinking. Tokyo, the Haiku Group. I know who their main competitors are. One call to my partner, and the terms of their offer will be adjusted so that Ethan's project seems like child's play. Thank you for the information, Ethan. You have just gifted me millions by depriving yourself of a future. 2. The psychological X-ray phase. Ethan committed a mistake that biologists call premature signaling. Symbolic completion theory. When you tell of your goals, your brain receives a portion of dopamine as if the goal has already been achieved. Your psyche closes the task. On a physiological level, the drive and will to implement the plan fall sharply. You have consumed your motivation with words. Information interference. Plans in the development stage are extremely fragile. By telling of them, you allow others' opinions, fears, and criticisms to seep into your strategy, creating cognitive noise. Neurochemistry. Ethan's quote, _79, nucleus accumbens, was triggered from the mere fact of social approval. He is already quote 80 in his imagination, and now his body has no reason to spend colossal resources on the real struggle in Tokyo. 3. The quote 81 phase. In 1933, psychologist Vera Mahler discovered the phenomenon of quote 82. If a person voices their intention and receives recognition from others, their brain perceives this as a quote 83. In her experiments, subjects who kept their plans secret worked on difficult tasks until the end, while those who shared their plans gave up at the first difficulties. Your quote 84 is heard by the brain as quote 85. Sarah knows this. She provoked Ethan into a discharge of energy into the void. He left the party hollowed out, while she left armed. 4. The quote 86 phase. If Ethan were a major league player, he would have enveloped his future in the underscore quote underscore 87 underscore lesson number 4. Let your actions speak for you when they are already completed. Your future should be a sudden clap of thunder for others. How he should have acted. Red herring. Underscore underscore. Quote underscore 88 underscore underscore. Information asceticism. The less people know about your next steps, the fewer opportunities they have to prepare countermeasures. Silence is your strategic armor. Radical pragmatism. Conserve the energy of intention within. Direct dopamine not into words, but into microtasks. Your brain must remain underscore underscore, quote underscore 89 underscore underscore for the completion of the work. 5. Sensory immersion. In the gallery, it becomes stifling. The smell of expensive perfume mixes with the scent of oil paints, creating a suffocating atmosphere of falsehood. Ethan looks at his hands and notices a slight tremor. Sarah has already moved away to another guest. Her back looks like an impenetrable wall. The spotlights hit the eyes, turning the people around into featureless shadows. Ethan feels a strange emptiness in his stomach. The very kind that occurs when you have exhaled too early before the finish line. Tokyo is still far away, but in this room, he has already lost it. Your money is not just a medium of exchange. It is your fangs, your armor, and your ability to change reality. When you reveal the size of your resources or their source, you voluntarily strip yourself of protection. In the eyes of others, you cease to be a person and become a sum. And any sum can be either appropriated or destroyed out of a sense of biological injustice. Chapter 5. Financial exhibitionism. Never reveal your true income and resource sources. 1. The underscore underscore quote underscore 90 underscore underscore phase A. Private golf club in the suburbs of London. The smell of freshly cut grass and expensive perfume. James, a middle-level technical director, walks along the field with Thomas, his longtime colleague and, as he believed, quote 91 quote in the corporate war. James has just closed a personal deal on a crypto exchange that brought him a sum 5 times greater than his annual bonus. The adrenaline is still pulsating in his veins. He feels invincible. Underscore underscore quote underscore 92 underscore underscore James makes a perfect swing. Underscore underscore quote underscore 93 underscore underscore James smiles, expecting admiration. Thomas freezes with the club in his hands. His face remains inscrutable, but his jaw muscles tighten slightly. James's internal monologue. Underscore underscore quote underscore 94 underscore underscore. Underscore underscore quote underscore 95 underscore underscore Thomas finally hits the ball. The ball flies far into the bushes. Quote 96, thinking, quote 97. 2. The quote 98 phase. James committed a classic mistake. He provoked social comparison and relative deprivation. Biological envy. From an ethological point of view, another's resource is a resource taken from you. The underscore underscore quote underscore 99 underscore underscore principle. Learning about James's wealth, Thomas felt physical pain in the same areas of the brain that respond to physical injury. Destruction of hierarchy. In the corporate structure, Thomas and James were equals. Now James has jumped sharply upward. This causes instinctive aggression in Thomas, a need to restore the status quo by destroying the source of James's superiority. Neurochemistry. James gave out information at the peak of a dopamine trance. In this state, critical thinking is suppressed. He sought quote 100, but instead, he painted a target on his back. 3. The quote 101 phase. In 2003, researchers Sarah Brosnan and Franz de Waal conducted a famous experiment with capuchin monkeys. Two monkeys were given the same tasks. When both received cucumbers as a reward, everything was calm. But as soon as one monkey began to be given sweet grapes and the other still a cucumber, the quote 102 monkey fell into a rage. It threw the cucumber at the researcher, screamed, and refused to cooperate. Your quote 103 is the grapes. Those around you who eat their quote 104 in the form of a salary will never forgive you for that taste. Thomas is not just envious. His brain is signaling to him the injustice of resource distribution in the pack. And the only way to calm this neurochemical storm for him is to punish the quote 105 relative. 4. The quote 106 phase. If James were a strategist, he would have used quote 107 tactics. Lesson number 5. Your capital is a quiet power. The louder you declare it, the faster it will be taken from you. How he should have acted. Camouflage. Your expenses and standard of living should only slightly exceed the average level of your environment. Extra money should work in the shadows, creating a quote 108 that no one knows about. Complaint as a shield. Instead of bragging about profit, it is sometimes useful to complain about small financial difficulties. Repairs, taxes. This removes suspicion and dampens others' envy. Radical pragmatism. Resources are tools for future maneuvers. By revealing their volume, you allow the enemy to calculate your endurance. Never let them know how long you can hold out without their cucumbers. 5. Sensory immersion. The wind on the golf course becomes sharp, piercing to the bone. The bright green grass seems artificial, like a prop in a cheap theater. Thomas slowly walks to his bag, and the sound of his steps on the gravel resembles the grinding of teeth. James looks at his club. The cold metal in his hands no longer seems like a symbol of success. Now it is just a piece of steel. In the air hangs the smell of damp earth and an approaching thunderstorm. The silence between them is no longer friendly. It is filled with the heavy, sticky expectation of a stab in the back. Your fear is a leash that you place in the hands of the executioner yourself. At the moment you confess your doubts, you cease to be a leader and become an object of control. In the social hierarchy, there is no place for humanity in moments of decision-making. There is only the projection of strength or the projection of weakness. Your internal chaos is your private business. Bring it outside, and it will become your cage. Chapter 6. The Protocol of Vulnerability. Never reveal your fears and inner doubts. 1. The encounter phase. Seattle. An evening on the terrace of a private club hidden in the fog. Henry, a man claiming the role of head of an international consortium, sits in the shadow of a massive column. Across from him is Sophia, a woman whose intellect works like a high-precision scalpel. She knows how to listen so that people begin to confess without even noticing it. Henry twirls a heavy glass of whiskey in his fingers. The ice hits the glass with a dry, irritating sound. "Sophia," Henry says quietly, "sometimes I feel like I am just playing a role. What if I cannot cope with this pressure? What if this entire strategy is merely a house of cards that will collapse from the very first serious crisis? I fear that I do not have that toughness which is needed for this chair." Henry's internal monologue. My breathing has become shallow. I feel a chill run down my back. I need her to say that I will manage. My brain is seeking comfort like a child. Pulse, 105. I look into her eyes, hoping to see support there. But I see only my own reflection in the black pupils. Why did I say that? My instinct of self-preservation is screaming that I have committed a fatal error. Sophia leans forward slightly, her face illuminated by the soft light of the lamps. But her gaze remains cold. To be afraid is normal, Henry. She says softly, thinking. Recorded, imposter syndrome. Entry point found. Your fear is your Achilles' heel. Now I know that in moments of crisis, it is enough to push you only slightly toward doubt, and you will paralyze yourself. You are a temporary figure. I will use your insecurity to make decisions for you until you finally break. 2. The psychological X-ray phase. Henry has just conducted a session of voluntary psychological disarmament. In the world of strategy, this is called emotional leakage. Amygdala hijack. Under the influence of stress, Henry allowed his limbic system to take the upper hand over the prefrontal cortex. He sought an oxytocin refuge, support. But in the context of the struggle for power, this is equivalent to demonstrating the throat to a predator. The effect of weakness projection. Those around you read your state not through words, but through micro-signals. No voiced doubt legitimizes their right to doubt you. Now any decision of Henry's will be viewed through the prism of his incompetence, which he himself declared. Neurochemistry. Henry is in a state of cortisol nosedive. His confession lowered his testosterone level, the hormone responsible for confidence and dominance. For Sophia, he has ceased to be an alpha. 3. The psychological precedent phase. The 1970s, psychologist Paul Ekman, who studied micro-expressions of the face, proved that fear cannot be completely hidden if it is autonomous. However, he also revealed that verbal confirmation of fear gives the opponent a cognitive advantage. In clinical studies on social dominance, it was established that subjects who openly expressed their doubts about leadership abilities lost up to 60% of influence over the group within the very first week. Society is programmed biologically to follow the one who transmits confidence, even false, and to reject those who doubt. As soon as Henry admitted his fear, he activated in Sophia the instinct to utilize the weak link. 4. The counter-strike phase. If Henry were a real player, he would have used the technique of the Stoic monolith. Lesson number 6. Your fear is noise. Your action is the signal. Others should see only the signal. How he should have acted. Internalization. All doubts must be worked through in solitude or with a paid specialist who does not have access to your social field. Radical pragmatism. Turn fear into risk management. Instead of, I am afraid that I will not cope, tell yourself, what variables could lead to a failure? And work with them as numbers, not as feelings. False steadfastness. Even if a storm is raging inside you, your face must be motionless like a no-theater mask. Silence is the best way to hide a tremor in the voice. 5. Sensory immersion. The Seattle fog slowly creeps onto the terrace, swallowing the city lights. The air is damp and heavy. It smells of salt and wet asphalt. Sophia slowly places her glass on the table. The sound of thin glass hitting stone seems like thunder to Henry. In this silence, Henry feels the space around him shrinking. His own confession hangs in the air as a sticky cloud that cannot be dispersed. Sophia looks at him, and in that gaze, there is no more partnership. Only the cold calculation of a predator who already knows how the prey will be butchered. Your last mistake will become your tombstone. We have reached the finale, to that which lies at the very foundation of yourself. You can hide your money, plans, and goals, but if you leave the door open to your addictions, everything else will not matter. An addiction is not always a syringe or a bottle. It can be a need for praise, a passion for a certain comfort, or even a harmless habit without which you feel uncomfortable. For a predator, this is not a habit. It is an entry point. Chapter 7. The Breach Point. Never reveal your true weaknesses and addictions. Orisanuum. The Encounter Phase. A private terminal at the airport in Geneva. Outside, a sterile alpine cold. Inside, the smell of expensive leather and aviation fuel. Eleanor, a leading expert on mergers and acquisitions, waits for her flight. Opposite her, in a deep chair, sits Victor, a man whose fortune is measured in billions and whose conscience is measured in zeros. Eleanor is slightly nervous before the decisive round of negotiations. She takes from her bag a small silver box containing a rare variety of dark chocolate with sea salt. This is her ritual. Without this taste, her brain refuses to enter the state of flow. This is her little, harmless weakness. A rare choice, Eleanor. Victor leans forward, his movements fluid like those of a leopard. Chocolate from small farms in Ecuador. I noticed you always eat exactly 2 squares before you sign a contract. Is this your lucky talisman? Eleanor smiles, feeling a slight sting of pride in her uniqueness. You could say that, Victor. It helps me concentrate. A small reward for a difficult day. Eleanor's internal monologue. He is attentive. It is flattering. My pulse has increased to 85 beats. I feel warmth in the back of my head, a slight release of dopamine from the recognition of my uniqueness. It is only chocolate. What is wrong with that? We are just having a social conversation before takeoff. Victor nods, and in his eyes, a cold light of interest flares up. Charming, he says, thinking. Recorded, rigid cognitive binding to an external stimulus. You have created a dopamine trap for yourself. Now it is enough for me to delay the delivery of this specific product or substitute it at the critical moment of the negotiations, and your confidence will crumble. Your little reward is the Turn Off Eleanor button, which you have just handed to me. 2. The Psychological X-ray Phase. Eleanor has made a fatal disclosure of her breach point. She demonstrated the external support of her psyche. Operant conditioning. Eleanor herself trained her brain that success is possible only in the presence of an external stimulus, chocolate. She created a dopamine loop where the ritual is more important than reality. Psychological hook. Any addiction is a way of regulating one's emotional state. By revealing it, you inform the adversary. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 144, underscore, underscore. Neurochemistry. At the moment of expecting a underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 145, underscore, underscore, Eleanor's dopamine level rises. If this stimulus is removed or distorted, the brain instantly switches to a state of cortisol stress. Victor understands this. He will strike not at Eleanor's strategy, but at her biological attachment. 3. The underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 146, underscore, underscore phase. Recall the famous experiments of B.F. Skinner with his underscore, underscore. Quote, underscore 147, underscore, underscore Skinner proved that behavior can be completely controlled through a system of reinforcements. The rat in the box pressed a lever to receive food. But the most terrifying discovery was that when the reward became irregular, the rat became obsessed with the lever. You are that same rat if you have an addiction. Victor has studied your underscore, underscore, quote, _148___. He knows that if he deprives you of the usual reinforcement, you will begin to perform impulsive, chaotic actions to return the feeling of comfort to yourself. Your addiction makes you a predictable object in the laboratory of a social engineer. 4. The ___. Quote _149___ phase. If Eleanor were a master of applied strategy, she would practice ____ quote _150_ lesson number 7. Your only legitimate addiction is your own will. Everything else is chains that you forge yourself. How she should have acted. Change of stimuli. Never tie your cognitive abilities to external rituals. If you need chocolate, coffee, or music for work, you have already lost. Train the brain to turn on ___. Quote _151_ in any conditions. Disinformation. If you have a weakness, create a ___ quote _152__. Demonstrate a penchant for something you are actually indifferent to. Let the enemy waste resources attacking an empty place. Asceticism as a weapon. Regularly renounce what you like. This strengthens the prefrontal cortex and makes you invulnerable to manipulation through ___. Quote _153__5. Sensory immersion. Silence falls in the terminal, broken only by the distant hum of turbines. Eleanor looks at the chocolate in her hand. Now it seems to her like a piece of gray wax. The air in the waiting room becomes thin, as if in the high mountains, and it is difficult for her to breathe. Victor looks out the window at the runway. His profile resembles the frozen mask of an ancient god of war. He is no longer looking at her. He already knows everything about her. Eleanor feels how her quote _154_ ritual turns into a stigma. The light from the lamps reflects off glossy surfaces, emphasizing her loneliness in this game. The negotiations have not yet begun, but her will is already packed in luggage and sent into someone else's hands. Final deconstruction. You have just completed the journey through 7 stages of dismantling your social naivety. This process can be compared to a surgical operation without anesthesia. We have removed unnecessary illusions, exposing the dry and hard mechanics of human interactions. The world around you has not changed. It has remained the same battlefield where one wrong gesture can cost you your sovereignty. But you have changed. Now that you know exactly what social predators are looking for in you, you have become a black swan to them, an unpredictable variable that is impossible to compute. Your personality is no longer an open book, but an encrypted file. Remember the images of those we dissected: Julian, Eleanor, Marcus. Their mistakes were dictated by the same need, the desire to be seen, understood, and accepted. In the world of strategy, this desire is a death sentence. Real power does not need applause. It is quiet, like the movement of a shadow in an empty corridor. It smells of cold metal and ozone after a thunderstorm. It is felt as a steady pulse of 60 beats per minute at the moment when empires are crumbling around you. He who does not know how to remain silent does not know how to rule. This is not just a quote. It is a biological imperative. Your silence creates a vacuum that forces those around you to nervous, make mistakes, and reveal their cards. Sensory finale. Imagine a room flooded with the cold light of early morning. You stand by the window, looking at the city that has not yet woken up. In your hands is a glass of ice water. On the surface, there is not a single drop of condensation. Your palm is dry and firm. You are absolutely transparent to this world. No one knows your goals. No one has seen your scars. No one knows the volume of your resources. You are zero in their equations, and that is precisely why you are the master of the result. Your path is only beginning. Now this knowledge must turn from theory into a reflex, into your new skin that is impossible to pierce. Remain in the shadow. There, where silence becomes the loudest manifesto of your will. Knowledge of the mechanisms of the psyche is your main freedom. Subscribe to explore the hidden facets of human behavior together. And be sure to write in the comments which psychological pattern or strategy we will analyze next time. Let us seek the truth together.